And then all of a sudden I just feel that sucking away. If we, especially if we don't plan.
How are you?
Is there any?
Developers come in and again, it's, you have to drive into a little tiny neighborhood to access anything. People aren't gonna come there as much.
Yeah, pretty much, right,
That's when
yeah.
they can turn the trailer around.
I mean, essentially,
Yeah.
I like different people's ideas.
Some parts getting left out of the
I read stuff and go.
I didn't think about it till after and I was like, we're gonna start bringing this up.
Yeah, oh yeah.
Did we get that land or is it granted that land?
We're ready to know if we wanna. Nominated. Is that they will just get all of these.
The interesting stuff that they will.
And is Jared on
That's the problem.
have
If you're gonna be libertarian, be libertarian, that's great. But apply that.
Okay, everyone, we're ready to get started.
Makes me nervous.
We have to have a,
Okay, alright. Mayor's on the layout. Haven't seen.
I'll make a motion, we appoint Councilmember Orrin as the mayor pro tem for this meeting.
Second.
I have a motion and a second, all in favor?
Aye.
Okay, let's keep going. We're beginning our work meeting today, Wednesday, February 9th, here at Fort Harriman Conference Room. First item of business on the agenda is council business. Review of this evening's agenda. Does anybody have any questions or concerns or changes on the agenda? Okay. Next, 1.2 future agenda items. Does anyone have anything they'd like to serve for future agendas? We are cruising right along. Okay, 2.1 discussion pertaining to request to amend the land use designations for plot 35 and 39 at the South Hills Master Plan Development Agreement. Mike Finley.
This item and the next item actually was presented by Clint at the planning commission meeting, and he's here tonight, so he's gonna go ahead and cover these.
I'm gonna stay off camera over here, so hopefully that's okay. I'll try to go through this quick. So these are two, items 2.1 and 2.2, very similar, follow the same kind of logic, and this is the area for Academy Village. Just proposing some changes in their land use master plan. So this is part of the overall MDA. It's an attachment. So by ordinance, they're required, when they make an amendment, they're required to change that. The areas that they're changing, you can see the two, plot 35 and 39 in that upper left-hand corner. There's two outlined areas that are brown, highlighted in yellow. Those are two residential areas that they're combining into one. They're gonna move all that from, well, they're gonna move the brown section, the residential section from 39 to 35. So all of it will be included on 35. There's no additional units that are included. The benefit to this is that we pick up more commercial property for commercial development, and then that all those units just they remain in the area, but just in a more consolidated area.
And it feels like they all are adjacent to other residential too, which makes more
Yeah,
sense.
I mean, the neighboring properties are all high density. This will be a little bit higher density than what's next door, but it's more adjacent in terms of proximity to the commercial side. So it's kind of acts as a buffering from that commercial to the lower high density, you can say that. This is just in terms of compliance with the East Area General Plan. This is a recommendation from the City Council, from the Planning Commission, was unanimous on this. Any questions on that one?
What was the commission's view?
What's that?
What was the planning commission's view on it? Any room it?
Yeah,
6-0.
yeah, it's unanimous decision, so they didn't have any concerns. Went through fairly quick. Okay.
Okay. No questions on 2.1, 2.2?
Yeah, point two. Yeah. So just in terms of that land use, so by amending the land use plan, they're also changing the zones to reflect that land use plan. These are the things that we're looking at in terms of compliance. The changes that they are making, we feel like are in compliance with all the requirements of the ordinance. Again, same area. So this is the existing zoning right now. This is the area where the high-density apartment complex will be. And then, so all this purpley area on the other side of these here, these are mixed use right now, MU2 zones. So they're changing, this area will become RM, which supports high-density housing for their project. The rest of this mixed use becomes commercial, the C2 zone. So this is what the final zoning will look like to support their project. And again, this went before the city, or the planning commission, and it was unanimous for approval. Pretty simple.
Thanks, Clint. Any questions?
I just have a comment, that seeing the, design guidelines, the rendering of what they wanna build there, I think that's a really cool product. I think that would be really, a new entrant into the Harriman housing market. There's nothing like that around here. I think that would be really cool, very, very high end, very, as my wife would say, bougie.
Bougie.
And I like that. I like the idea of expanding the footprint of the commercial in the area. I think that allows for even some additional businesses or a little bigger businesses or, so I'm generally in favor of, these ideas as they're gonna come to, for action here soon. My comment would be that as we are getting requests to modify MDAs, that it behooves us as a city council to be looking to modify those MDAs in ways that we feel they have breakdowns or loopholes or things that we would like to see changed. In this particular MDA, the one thing that I would really like to see change is the ability to continue to annex land into the MDA. And just the MDA gets bigger and bigger and bigger, and there's more and more units, and they try and find ways to squeeze in more units and more places. I just think if there's gonna be new development with, new landowners in a new area in a new situation, it should be a new MDA or follow a different zone or do something like that. And I'd like for us to get that stricken out of this MDA and other MDAs like it. So, I don't wanna direct anybody or tell anybody what they think, but, I think before we see this as an action item, we need to have probably a direct staff to get into some discussions about that particular item and negotiate on that.
Is that the only point in the MDA that you see, or
Well,
is
I'm
it?
sure there's others, but that's the big one at this
Yeah.
point. That's one of the big, I think there were some reasons when they did it originally, but at this point, it feels a little bit like a poison pill.
When they did their MDA amendment 2 years ago, we made a list of their design guidelines and had them change a bunch of those to bring things up to code because they were in
Right.
with old code. So
I think
we've done that
yeah.
once.
Yeah, and they were amenable to that. It made sense to come up to new code, and we were making some changes for them, right? So I don't wanna make this an ultimatum point, but this is a pretty substantial issue. And I'm kinda reluctant to make further changes until we get that one resolved, for what that's worth.
Now, is that after this request, or are you saying you wanna have that conversation as part of this request?
part of
I can
this
tell you right
request.
now, Wasatch Commercial is wanting to go fast, right? They wanna move forward
Yep.
quickly. And they had even asked to be on our next agenda your next agenda for action and in your direction.
Yeah, and
So.
I won't tell
we
them
can-
not to. I mean, I don't have that authority to tell them, don't request it to come for an action item. I would just say that, my particular point of view and what I would ask the rest of council to back is that we wouldn't make a decision on this until we have some discussion and negotiation on that other point.
In that case, I would say it would not be on our next council agenda, your next agenda, and we would need to have a conversation with Wasatch on this.
Is that the direction of the council, I guess?
Any feedback from the rest of the members, Eddie?
I think it's a very good point anytime somebody comes asking for something that we take the time to review and ask if we have a need, right? And it appears that this is a need. I've seen it already pop up in another development close of a wish list item, right? That could potentially not help us in the city to get that development we want. So I think it's a very valid point. And if there's other items like other guidelines or standards that have been passed through the last 2 years that we need to raise the bar on this new development, that may be potential to ask for those things.
Well, again, we did that in this development already, the
Okay.
MDA.
Okay,
That's what Blake was talking about 2 years ago.
okay.
Yeah.
And nothing significant has changed in the last 2 years to do
They
that
haven't
again?
amended it since then.
Okay, alright. So,
My concern, honestly, I think this negotiation tactic works if this is something that changes it to the detriment of the city. I think this is addition to I think this is a positive for the city, changing to more commercial. I think we're almost, Steve, I agree. I think this, them being able to add, to the MDA over and over again is awful. But I just don't know if this is the right time. I worry about that if we ask right now and they're bringing in more commercial, I'd rather have this product than the other one. Are they going to go back and say, well, then never mind, we'll go back to the other, where I like this plan better? That's my concern about the ask right now.
Yeah, I think that's probably a fair concern. I would be lying if I said I didn't share your concern. But at the same time, there has to be a point where we are firm in our resolve to negotiate some things, right? Or to change some things.
but do we really lose commercial space? Cause it's mixed use right now. We still have the square footage commercial space, right, Lauren? It's just put together as all residential in that new RM zone.
I think what he's talking about is they got 2 RM zones.
Are they RMs or are they mixed use?
They're 2 RMs.
Oh, I see, okay. I thought it was just the mixed
We're
use.
increasing commercial by doing this.
Cause they're essentially going up taller.
Yes.
And again, that's why I said I like the plan and I like the product that they're suggesting. I would generally like to help find a way to facilitate that happen. But I have this other concern too, and the reason is that it's come up in just the past 2 weeks
Yep.
of people saying, I don't wanna misrepresent anything, but let's just saying there's this idea if we are unwilling to agree to what a certain developer's plan is, they'll say, well, we'll just annex into this other MDA and then you don't get any say.
Yeah.
And I don't like that, frankly. I don't like to be levered into a decision or threatened into a decision. And I just like to take that off the table so we can negotiate honestly.
Do you have any comments on this, Jerry?
I came in late, but reading through the material, I agree with the principle, but I don't know that this is the time or the place for that fight. I mean, there's gonna be other asks that this group will have in particular, and that's something that's come up over and over and over again for Rose Crest and Wasatch. I assume you're talking about Malibu Laguna. As far as I know, it's not involved with Wasatch. It could be, I mean, if that were to happen, we can fight that fight.
Well, the reason I would say is the timing of is we have been told, not only in Laguna Malibu discussions, but in other discussions, that if we don't come to a decision that they find favorable, they'll annex into the MDA. Laguna Malibu is, 1,000 acres. That would give them 4,000 more units into that MDA.
We still control zoning
Sure.
and general plan.
But- Again,
I
it just becomes a way where it doesn't, it gives somebody an alternative instead of negotiating in earnest with us, which I don't wanna represent that they haven't been. But
I
it
was
just
gonna-
says
my
if they
next
don't,
question
if they
is
don't
this-
like what we want, then they're just gonna say, we're just gonna abandon it, and I don't think that's fair, to be honest with you. So
I would agree with that, again.
that's why I think the timing of this is, both unfortunate and fortuitous.
So
So let me ask you this, could this be, cause my concern about any of it is delaying commercial projects. So if they have
Yep.
stuff that's ready to rock and roll on this and people ready to come into our city and we delay this, then that's concerning to me, cause we need the commercial. But the question would be, can this be put on a next meeting? We wouldn't have it for an action item anyway, because we always would discuss this, right? Does this have to have public hearings associated with
No,
it?
no.
So typically we would not act on it next week.
Typically, it
anyway.
would be in
Two.
4 weeks essentially, normally.
Yeah, we would do,
They
we'd
were
talk about it,
asking to be accelerated if the council was willing.
but typically we would talk about it next week and then just make a decision on it. Well, the next meeting and then the next meeting after that, we'd make a decision. My question is, in those 2 weeks, is there opportunity to discuss with these guys about concerns about the MDA? And still have it on for a discussion, it would be on our general meeting, but we'd discuss it after some of this conversation about the MDA and see where we're at. Would you be amenable to that?
I'm just one voice, and I'm
No.
just expressing that I really don't wanna hold this up. I'm in favor of what they've
Right.
presented. I'm just at this point unwilling to go forward with that until I've addressed this other issue. I just think it's too much of an issue with too many other landowners all trying to do the same thing, and I think that these other particular landowners have land that's different. And it has a different plan and a different idea, and I don't think making it a part of this MDA is an appropriate recourse, and so I would like to prevent that.
Would you guys feel comfortable with, go ahead, Mayor.
See, what's our leverage though? That's what I'm wondering, cause I agree, but you know that, I'm frustrated about the South Hills additions too, but what's our leverage in this situation? Like, there's no leverage on our part, cause this is a better product. That's my concern about this situation right now, is that we don't have any leverage, cause I don't want them to go back
So I mean, my pick.
if we slow it down and we process, and they throw their hands up in the air and say, okay, we're gonna take this retail or commercial somewhere else, just because we wanna stop this MDA, I don't know, that's my, I don't like the idea of, I think we can ask, I don't think it hurts to ask.
Are you saying that, 10,000 square feet of retail is good enough to allow 4,000 more houses, or 1,500 more houses, or more multifamily units being added onto the hillside? I mean, to me, it's not a matter of this decision versus what currently is in place. That's only part of what's facing us, is that the implications are that as long as this issue extends in the MDA, there's a possible, but I would consider almost an abuse of that clause.
I think it's up to answer Sherry's question. Absolutely, we should talk about it. It's something that we've been, you and I especially, the last 4 years. These two agreements are terrible in that, so we need to find a way, and we should be getting close enough to the end that they reasonably know what they aren't gonna do and know what they can talk about. But to Lauren's point, is this the right moment to plant our stake in the sand and prevent something that's ultimately good for us?
Well, like Steve said, I don't think it's an ultimatum, this or that, but it's, let's start that conversation and say, hey, they know that we know that this is an issue, but here's our point to actually voice it as a council and say, hey, this is, next time you come to us, we're looking for a negotiation tool.
If anybody hasn't actually spoken with Wasatch about this, then shame on us for even going this route. We should be opening that line of communication already.
So the question again is, shall we put this on in 2 weeks and we talk to them in the meantime and see, open up that line of communication and start going down that path of adjusting the MDA? Or do we bump this to another work meeting and?
I don't think it's an either or, right? I think you can do both, and if at the next meeting, there's been no progress or no discussions or no anything, we'll have that as part of our deliberations when we decide what to do.
Okay, so do you guys want this on the general meeting in 2 weeks?
Does it grant an expedition, basically, right, for 2 weeks? Does it grant it for 2 week process or the traditional 30 days, like in 2
Well,
weeks?
we don't have to act on it, we
Yeah,
we can talk about it, discuss it, it can be on for,
So what, and I was, 8 minutes late or so, but for these items in our meeting today, like, what's the issue? What are they asking for?
They're asking to be put
Just
on
our
next
thought.
week agendas
That's the ask.
for approval.
for approval.
I have no problem with it being on the agenda, but the conversation needs to be had. whether that's asking Nathan to reach out to whoever their representative is now. I mean, it's an issue for us that we want resolved, whether it's this or in the near future, let's talk about it.
Yeah, and I just reiterate this point. The issue isn't, do we get this new proposal or do we get what's currently taken care of or what's currently proposed? For me, the issue is much bigger than that. It's this ever expanding MDA that is gonna take over all of the Harriman Hills and,
We all have
you know,
that concern.
right.
Yeah.
And so I just think that they're asking us to make some amendments. I'd like to make some amendments too.
If we have a give, you want to get.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay, so are you guys good with it, putting it on in 2 weeks, having a discussion there, general meeting?
We can
and-
discussion.
Right, in the meantime, we should reach out and discuss those concerns that we have with the MD and see how we can clean that up.
Do you want them to come to a meeting just to be able, like, at the next meeting to be there to be able to talk about that? Or how do you wanna delegate somebody to open that conversation?
Yeah, we did.
Yeah.
My suggestion would be to have our city
Yeah, have
reach
city
out to
manager
them.
and legal counsel reach out to their representative and start a conversation there.
Okay, voice our concerns with
Yeah.
that and see what we can do about tightening that up. And maybe even look into exactly how much longer do we have on that, how many units are still left on that, those types of details, so we really understand factually what could happen, what couldn't happen, those types of things. And then,
How many units are still
are you
in the
guys
bank?
good with that?
Yeah, we can get that info.
Yeah, there's,
Our draft reports are due tomorrow.
well, we can put that in,
Yeah,
it won't
you
be
can-
in that report.
yeah.
We'll just have to report back.
No, I don't
Such as what
I don't
it is.
expect it to be, cause it's really, even though it's tied to it, it's separate from this, what we would see on the agenda. This is a negotiation that we want to
Well,
understand.
and we need to, I mean, to be fair, I think we need to take stock on our side of things as well, because the MDA, to my recollection, isn't open-ended and just says you get this many units no matter what. It's still subject to zoning and general plan, et cetera. They're still limited in what they can do where. It doesn't mean that it's 4,000 units just because it's the number of acres times the units. That's not what the agreement is.
They add
So
to
we
their
need to know what we're really talking about, right? Instead of,
And even though it could be added to your bucket, the question is there anywhere they can build the houses, even if it's in their bucket?
Right,
So
'cause
those
we-
kind of
Right,
questions.
but
Even with
there's
their
areas that
even-
they might be planning to build, 8-unit things, but there's an abundance of extra units and they would wanna push those all to 20 units things. That's what the zoning allows for, up to 20 units. They might wanna find a way to max those out. And again, this is all hypothetical, right?
Right.
Yeah.
None of it is,
what I mean is that it's not open-ended. Like, we need to know realistically what
Yeah.
we're talking about.
Yeah.
To go in and say, we want X when it's not X, right?
For Wasatch's development, if you remember when they did Soleil Loss and put the RSL complex in, they moved all their density off the hill down to the bottom, so they really are left with medium and low density.
And that was part of that amendment, is we said, okay, we'll let you do that, but only if it limits what you get to do.
They haven't changed that much, so they, to your point, they don't have a lot of area to push those units up high. So they'd have a lot of units in their bucket, but they'd be unable to
They
use
don't.
them.
Right.
Now Rosecrest might be a different story, they might have a few areas where they can push some things up higher, but the general plan and zoning they just can't exceed the density allowed in that base zone. And remember, it's the 2008 general plan, it's not the one we're using. So it's the old general plan and it's the old zone.
So, okay, everyone good with that? Okay, let's move on to 2.3, discussion regarding a proposed amendment to Title 10 pertaining to accessory structure regulations. Clint.
Okay, now the real fun begins. So we took your suggestions from last time, well, in the limited time we had, and I tried to make some changes to those, tried to make the presentation a little more interesting. So here are the objectives we talked about last time. So this is the updates that we made since the last meeting. So amended the setbacks next to a street. Rear yard only for accessory structure calculation, updated the special exception with a consideration for corner lots, clarified the rear yard, and then added some additional agricultural exemptions. So setbacks adjacent to a street, if you remember last time, anything, 16 feet and shorter could be within 1 foot, and then anything taller than 16 feet could be set back 3 feet from the street, which kind of obstructed that whole street of the block face. So our proposal now is if it's 8 feet or less, it can be within 1 foot of the property line. If it's taller than 8 feet, it has to meet the setback of a home. And then in terms of rear yard measurement, this is what we would look at. So if there's an attached awning, a covered deck, those would all be removed from the calculation for the rear yard. So this would be an interior lot on the left side, and then on the right hand, a corner lot. How we would look at that. So one of the benefits to a corner lot is typically, as Mike was saying last meeting, they do have a larger side yard, and that rear yard extends the entire width of the lot. So when you have a corner lot, you do have some built-in, some additional built-in area that you could use towards calculating the maximum size for an accessory structure. Again, this is one of the corner lot exceptions. So when you have a corner lot that is, I think it's less than, so if the corner lot in this situation, if it's less than 25 feet, which is the minimum required setback, so they could use, in this situation, they could use the rear yard and then the larger side yard as part of the total calculation. The last time it was both side yards, which made that quite a bit larger. But this would just allow, if it's in this condition. So on this previous one here, this would not be eligible for corner lot consideration because they have essentially the same size rear yard as the neighbor next to them. But if they have a reduced rear yard where it's 25 feet or less, then they could use this larger side yard as part of the calculation for their accessory structure.
But only the side that might put it on.
They could put it on the other side, but they could just use the larger side in terms of calculating how large it could be. So I think in this situation, so that would apply to this one here. Okay, and then this one goes back to another exception. So if the rear yard, I think, is 20 feet shallower than the nearest adjacent lot, then they could also include the larger side yard as part of the rear yard calculation. And with this thinking, if you added, so if they're more shallow 20 feet here than, in an adjacent lot, allowing them to use this side yard basically matches what the adjacent lot would get as well. Because a side yard typically adjacent to a street is going to be 20 feet. That's the logic behind that. And this is maybe a situation, this would not apply. So where these two lots, this is a corner lot, this is an interior, and you can see that the rear yards are essentially the same, so that would not apply to that type of situation. In terms of agricultural exceptions, we did look at, we did make a inclusion so that greenhouses would not have to meet the architectural requirements, which seems obvious. That was a good suggestion. And then these are the special exceptions. Again, I think we talked about these a little bit. We've had, surprisingly, from the last meeting to today, I bet we've talked about at least a dozen homeowners about rear yard, putting an accessory building back there, and everybody's waiting. It's kind of the waiting game. If you want to wait, we're amending the ordinance. So one of the changes that we made in terms of special exceptions is on these corner lots where you have a reduced corner, a reduced rear yard. Instead of going to a planning commission for approval, they could just be done administratively by staff. We could determine, okay, this is the larger side yard. It seems like an easy enough adjustment to make. There wouldn't be any additional exceptions for reductions in side yard or in setback or in height. Those types of things would still need to go to the planning commission if they wanted to do that. But if it was just for the size, that could be done administratively. And then we didn't talk about this last time, so I kind of wanted to just bring it up in terms of our definitions, what we're changing. So we're including this, what is considered an irregular lot versus a regular lot. And one of the conditions, so the planning commission, we had a pie-shaped lot because it's found quite commonly in the city. We had that as a regular lot. The planning commission felt that was more appropriate in the irregular lot category, so I'm just looking for more direction on that. And that's essentially everything.
Look at all those washes.
Wow.
This is like, ooh.
That was pretty cool.
Feeling fancy.
It didn't translate in the packet maybe. So if there's any more direction or thoughts on what we've proposed today, we'd be glad to.
Of course, I'm gonna have some. Do any of you guys have any comments on this?
On the pie-shaped lot, cul-de-sac lot, is it because of the calculations they want it to be an irregular, so it has to go back to planning commission? Or is it just for the admin process, cause it's a little more convoluted with the shape?
They just felt like I think the feeling, and maybe Lauren can chime in on this, but feeling was that pie shape isn't a regular lot. People buy those lots at the end of a cul-de-sac because there's a little more rear yard and they wanna have some more flexibility.
So they're typically bigger units
Yeah.
anyways.
And that was only for consideration for a special exception.
Correct.
If they comply with the standards, they would just apply for a
Correct.
building permit.
Okay.
I did notice that I appreciated that you clarified some of the additional height limits based on how far the setback is or how many feet over 16. You change that to the height of the adjacent building or 25 feet, whichever is less for, was it 10,000 square foot or bigger lots? So I appreciated that clarity. I think that's a really a good step, at least made it easier for me to understand, I think for residents to understand. And I didn't feel like it was just an arbitrary number, it kind of made sense, so I appreciate that.
Anyway, Mayor, do you have any comments on this?
I mean, not really. I mean, I've always leaned more on the more freedom side to do what they want, but I know I was in the minority on the planning commission as well, so I think I'll be in the minority today too, but I think where we're at is good. I mean, it's comparable to other cities in the area. I think it's a good place to be at right now.
It does broaden our tools right now. I mean, so in your concern, Mayor, it does add additional options that we don't currently have.
For sure, absolutely, and that's why I say I think we're in a good place. I think we're in a good place. I know Sherry has some concerns about some agricultural stuff, and I really want to address that. But otherwise, I think we're on the mark with the residential.
So first question I have is galvanized metal surfaces. This is just in design guidelines in general. I'm just wondering why we constantly ban galvanized metal surfaces. Like if you had you used to see them all the time, like on a meat shed or things like that. Why are we banning that?
So that is maybe just a term, something that we need to define as a value. In other communities, that's, a galvanized metal is not seen as a material that would match an agricultural or a residential type of development. Maybe more in an agricultural, but with our agricultural zones where we have quarter acre lots that are agricultural, and allowing them to have a galvanized metal facade on a building wouldn't necessarily match that residential feel.
Well, I'm not suggesting facade, but roofing. It's like galvanized metal roofing. I can almost for sure a galvanized metal roof is gonna slough snow better than an asphalt shingle roof.
And again, as Clint's mentioned, it really is a value decision.
Mhm.
If the council is interested in making that change, we're completely supporting.
So I guess I'm asking the council what, I guess I'll just echo what the mayor said. I tend to look towards freedom a little bit more than my own personal aesthetic choices. If I don't like something, then I probably won't put it on my property, but I don't think it like damages life, liberty, or property of my neighbors. I don't think it's gonna cause them significant harm if I had a chicken coop and I could put galvanized roofing on it. Anyway, so I kinda have a little heartburn over that. I just don't like, I do believe that if you want to live in areas that bans those kind of things, that's why we have CCNRs, that's why we have HOAs, those kind of things dictate that so that you can live in areas where you know that your neighbor's not gonna do that. And I also really have heartburn over the colors on agricultural structures. Let's see. May utilize such exterior building materials and are appropriate to use while still being the same color as the main dwelling. Have you ever seen barns? I mean, most stalls, especially prefab kind of stuff, are galvanized. you know, that's what they're made of. You bring those in, you set them up, they're galvanized metal. They're definitely not gonna be the same color. A lot of times people put up a hay barn that has, well, there's one in Harriman. If you drive down Harriman, Maine, right across from the new, what is the new Bastion? Well, where the house is, where the old house is. If you look just south of there, they put up a big building, and it's all done with metal siding, which is red. And so it's like, I don't know why we're dictating what color those can be. I have some heartburn about that, because seriously, if you go to certain barn manufacturers, that's what you're gonna get is galvanized metal. They're not corrugated shiny roofs typically, but that's just simply what they are. And so I just don't think that's in harmony with what I would think that we should ban in agricultural uses. Those are my concerns. How do you feel?
Would the council like to maybe do a straw poll and just give us some direction? Obviously, it'd be easy for us to make that amendment and put it into an ordinance, a draft ordinance for your consideration.
Yeah.
So, we just had a meeting earlier tonight. One of the things we were talking about is how what we define as a certain zone isn't necessarily an accurate description of what's happening in that particular area. So I would tend to agree with you in agricultural uses, more than I would say agricultural zones, if that makes sense.
Yeah, for sure.
So,
Well, this titles agricultural structures.
yeah, and that's probably where I would be in agreement with you. You know, if it's a barn, why can't it be red? The house could be
How
white, you know,
traditional
right?
is that?
I mean,
Red
like,
barn.
why would a metal roof on a barn be inappropriate, right? I mean, those seem, a little overly restrictive. But the issue is that how do you determine that between somebody who is on 2 or 3 acres and is building a barn versus somebody on a half acre who's building a ADU? You know what I mean, or something, right? Like there's a distinction in the zone, in the usage that isn't necessarily in the zone. So
Right.
as long as that's clarified, I would kind of support where you're
Well,
going.
because that's what it specifically calls that agricultural structures. It's not agricultural zones, but rather
Yeah.
agricultural structures. If you're using it for an agricultural structures with animals or things that define it, it tells in here with things that, you know, equipment and things like that are truly for agricultural uses. I just have some heartburn over why we're being so restricted on the material.
So it does have the exception there in that 1034-4A. It says, except for accessory building and structures in agricultural zones used for agricultural purposes, 200 square feet or larger, blah, 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 then it has to have all these other things. So there is an exception built in for real agricultural use properties. Am I reading that right?
Well, if you go down to
Right.
10-34-5, it addresses the agricultural standards.
So, yeah, the materials is different than, so the agricultural exception would be more for size and height.
Okay,
And the materials, it would.
is the 34-5 there?
Yeah.
Okay.
So in terms of materials, I agree with what you're saying as well. I don't know if you always wanna consider the bad actors, but you're gonna get somebody that's gonna say, hey, I wanna do a bright pink barn or something
Sure.
like that, and are we okay with that?
Sure. And I guess I just go back to I don't know, when I raised my hand, I said I would defend the Constitution of the United States and the state of Utah, and I'm like, how is this defending that? How is it, I just feel like it's overreach sometimes to dictate on private property. HOAs, CCNRs, those are different things. That's why you move into those types of communities, so that you don't have, that you can dictate those things. But on private property, it's deeply concerning to me that we go too far in regulating what people can and cannot do.
I would propose if the council is generally supportive, we'll modify that, we'll remove those restrictions, and maybe also define that at least half of the structure is used for truly agricultural purposes.
Yeah.
Maybe we have a threshold, so.
Yeah, and it talks about, you know, keeping of farm animals, storage of
Just
feed,
really
farm
define,
equipment,
you know.
et cetera. It
But-
defines that on here,
Yeah.
that's intended purpose.
We have had people try to get some exceptions under the agricultural use and say, I'm parking my John Deere lawnmower.
Mm.
And now it's ag.
Yeah.
So,
I guess
like I
if
said,
they're
maybe if
growing
we
their
say at
field,
least
that's it.
half or something
Well,
like
and-
that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I think that goes to, in the quarter acre, that A25,
Mhm.
it's not really ag, we've discussed that,
Right.
maybe we'll
Right.
clean that, but maybe we're talking. The one thing I would point out on galvanized roofs, having worked with a lot of pilots hate
Shiny.
those because they blind them. So that is something we may even wanna reach out to the airport and make sure we don't have some issues. Because 30,000 feet, a chicken coop will disorient a pilot.
It's really interesting. I guess that's why I bring it up. It's like, why are we saying no to those? And maybe that's why. Maybe it's because it's safety issues or things like that. But if it's completely aesthetic, then I balk a little bit on it.
Aesthetic.
And I think to add to that, even, I think if you have a bare galvanized metal roof, and you get just the sun glare off of that, it's gonna hit somebody's house, you know, just right,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
that could be a problem. I mean, we could do a non-reflective metal surface or something like that, to include that.
I don't know that a lot of people are gonna ask for those. I just always wanna be a little bit hesitant when there's,
Well, the way cost things are going, galvanized is cheap.
Well,
Yeah.
and
yeah,
we count galvanized different than standing seam steel.
yeah, cause it's listed
Right,
on here
yeah.
standing seam. Cause I have standing seam metal on my pump house, but, yeah. Anyway, those were just the questions I had. I was just confused about them.
We'll work on that.
Okay. Sorry, those are, you guys did great, it's getting there, but I was just, there's just so many structures that are agriculture that will not fit this, that simply seem like they would be in harmony with animal use.
And I think if somebody wants a pink barn, they get a pink barn.
And they do.
Not saying there's anything wrong with pink.
I think they fight with their neighbors, right?
Is the council willing to hear this in a regular session for consideration next time? I don't know that we would have it in 2 weeks.
That's what I was just gonna say, Michael.
Yeah.
Yeah, Michael, that's what I was just gonna say. Let's make this happen.
Cause I've been getting some emails and calls about
Yeah.
when.
We're never
Some
gonna
people that
get
need it.
perfect. You
No,
gotta
I
pull the
agree.
trigger
Yeah,
at some
I-
point, and
I'm-
then as things come up, we can amend it.
I'm completely supportive of having it on.
And
Okay,
this is a step in the right direction. And then
okay. Thank you.
That's the thing though, is that
Yeah, for sure. Okay, move on to 2.4, city social media roundtable.
So this was a request from council. We use our social media to do lots of things and often we are posting things from our partner agencies. Would be that the county or other special districts. And I think there's some discussion about how you want us to share those, if you want us to share it. I don't know if it's an issue, if it's just an issue on a specific
Yeah.
item. But we're looking for just some direction on how you want, what kinds of things you want us to do. I will point out, there are some agreements we have where we must share things for our agent, that's why we get some funding. And so we just need to be mindful of those.
I appreciate that, and I think that I think I was the one that brought this up. There was a shared post, and I would assume the county asked us to share it. It was just advertising the free COVID tests that were available. You could get 4 free tests to your home, and I've become really a stickler on that as of late, because I think that we are raising generations of people who believe the word free. And I just saw a report today, $56 billion is what Pfizer made off of the free vaccines last year. $56 billion.
We have spent, the United States government has spent more on COVID relief than we have on every war we've ever been involved in combined.
But
Inflation is not due to shortages in labor, it's due to
overspending.
overspending.
Increasing the money.
And my concern is if we continually call them free, then we just continually send the message that they're free, and it's simply not true. These are taxpayer-funded things. They're borrowed money for generations to come that we're having to pay back. And so if we continue to propagate that and to pass along that message, that's concerning to me. I don't wanna be part of that, sending that message. Now, I understand restrictions and things that we have to do, but when I pushed back, it was simply because of that, just that strong feeling that I just have that we are tipping on the edge of educating people that things are free that are not free. I definitely pay my taxes they seem to go up constantly, so I'm thinking that it's not free. So anyway, that was why, I brought that up, just to be sensitive to those kinds of things and messages that we send, continue to enforce that. And we don't create them, we've just been sharing them, so it was not directed at anyone on staff or anything like that, but I don't know how we can correct that, or as a city, that's my feeling. If you all feel differently, then we can be fine with that, but I just am concerned about continuing to support that narrative. That was the
Well,
issue I had
I
with that.
agree with that in principle. I also agree with comments you've made about it several weeks ago when it came out, that at the same time, I don't want people to think that they're gonna have to pay something when they don't. But for me, I think it's more where we can maybe help give direction to staff is we're asked to do some of these things. We're not, the ones that we have some subjectivity to, like what we want to do or can do. To me, there's a difference between making information available and pushing it, if that makes sense.
Yeah, for sure.
So the issue I have with this one is that at that time, it became a politicized thing versus a public health and safety thing, right? I mean, the county mayor was fighting with whoever else, and it's her directive, and now we have all of the conflicting data saying that masks aren't effective unless they're N95 and properly worn. If you look at the statement that the county mayor sent out, the quote from Angela Dunn is that N95 mask worn properly can help, right? It was in the fine print details that it was really spelled out. But I don't have any problem with this making information available, but we don't have to push it on people either.
Can I just ask for
Yeah,
clarification?
yeah, for sure,
Because
sorry.
if we're just taking their information and making it available to our public so that they have that information, what's the difference then? I need to know what you're considering pushing,
Well,
what you're
is it,
considering
are we
sharing.
posting it once
Because
or are we
we don't
posting it
put our
several times a day,
information-
right?
I think, Sherry, and this is a really subjective thing, right? Are we sharing information or are we supporting propagandizing something, right? And I understand the question.
Sure.
As it comes to these COVID tests, how do you explain that they're available without additional cost? How do you explain that to people and then still make the case? But except for the taxes that you pay are really what's paying for it, or the national debt that was borrowed to pay the money, you get into a really complicated thing instead of just saying, go get your free test,
Sure.
right?
If they could have just eliminated the word free, COVID tests are available. And they wouldn't even have to say free, because people could pop on and go, oh yeah, I can order these and I'm not getting charged, okay. There's just things that we could just eliminate by simply taking out the word free. And I understand that. So I guess if there's nothing we can do about that portion, just expect that on certain things, if I see it, because I'm not on social media all the time, but if I see it, I will probably comment on there saying, please remember that these aren't free and we're just passing along county messages, so if you don't like the message from the county, go to the county and tell them to quit saying this.
Do these, so, I can't remember how that post came out, but I remember seeing it. Was it our page just sharing the county post?
Well, so how they gave us that one, they just
PDF.
gave us the link and said share the link, and when you share the link, it pops up your little box in there
Pre-fills in the
that already has the information.
Yeah.
So that we don't have to type anything. That's how we share, we don't put in our own
Yeah.
information, we just
I knew that, I just didn't know if it's like, if we share cause I love sharing the city posts, but I probably didn't share that one. If we share and click it, it says, my name, then the city Harriman, you shared this post right from that page.
Yeah, if it's an
So,
actual
yeah, if it's
post
actual
that we're
share,
sharing. But if
Yeah, and I
it's a
try
link,
to,
it doesn't.
that's what one
And
ones I try to share is
Yeah.
actual official city posts.
And I would
if
love
share.
to share those posts, but I don't know if we can share it from the county website, if that's easier. And then it actually show it's from the county and not from the city.
Yes,
Or
and
how's
normally
it
that's
work?
what they do, but how they sent this one out is it was just literally, they gave us a link
Yeah.
and said, share this link with this information, so when you share that link, when you put the link
It
in
just
your
popped in the
thing,
webpage
it
post
pops
too.
in the little box,
Yeah.
so.
my intent is not to make a big issue of it tonight, where we have to discuss this for an hour, but I do feel like very concerning to me that I think that as people who are representatives, we have to start really understanding the messages that we're passing on to our children, and they're just simply not correct.
Well, even like Snellgrove shared his free fare, not free fare, it was no fare.
No
No
fare
fare
UTA.
rides for UTA, right, cause obviously it was free, but he used the no fare word because we're paying for it, somebody's paying for it.
That's a proper way to say it, no fare this month, but it's not free. Anyway, that would be, do you have anything to add, Mayor?
No, I mean, already, I was on one communication this week. I don't think the city, you guys know me, I'm super active. I don't think there's been one time that we've shared something that's just politically motivated from our staff. I just don't believe we have. Everything we've shared, so I don't think we need to change anything. I agree with, I get the concern, but I don't think the staff shared anything that's been inappropriate or pushing. They only share it once. We never share anything like that more than once. So we're not pushing anything, like, to your point, Jared, we're not pushing
Say
anything,
that,
we're
that was
sharing
my
that.
only question. I don't do that stuff enough to know.
Yeah. Well, I
We
don't
just
get
share
very
it.
often either.
Yep, so I think we're fine. I think the way Tammy's been doing it, honestly, I think is great, and I say carry on.
Perfect. And I would echo that my comments were not directed at all at staff or the sharing of it. It was just simply concern about that we continue to, as a society, think things are free and they are not. Okay, move on to 2.5, discussion pertaining to the draft general plan timeline. Michael.
And we just have a couple of maps, just for reference. I don't know if you really want to spend any time really looking or talking about the map. Obviously, what we're trying to find out is how does the council want to move forward in evaluating the draft plan and providing your feedback into the draft.
So, if I might, we had this discussion, and then we had an election. So we, instead of trying to push it through, we've held off. Time gets going by pretty quickly, so Michael and I said, we need to get this discussion going forward. You all are aware this town is changing very, very quickly. This process has taken so long that some of this is already done. It's a done decision. And so we're just trying to figure out how do we move this forward? I did talk to Chase about the language in the actual general plan versus the maps. And what is actually, and correct me if I'm wrong, my understanding that narrative really is not enforceable. There's a whole lot of boilerplate. Those of you who've read it, you realize that we got a plan from a consultant and it kind of reads the way a lot of those plans read. The maps are really where it starts to outline, and so we need to know how you wanna go forward. At one point, there was a talk about meeting and going through all that narrative. So we can do that. We can just talk about the maps and do these maps accurately represent what we want to do. The one thing I don't wanna do is just adopt a map that you have not looked at and thought about all the different areas that need to be thought about, because we have some of those already, right? We look at them and say, how did that get on that map that way? Somebody adopted it. That's why we have it, so.
And to
We're
add
looking
to
for some
that,
guidance.
Nathan's exactly right. The language is the language, right? It helps illustrate the intent that got you to the end product, which is the map, right? And so it helps in looking at the map to say, why did we designate this as X, Y, or Z? And you can just go back and look at that language, this is why. But really, the designation is X, Y, or Z, right? That doesn't change. So the language helps support that. To Nathan's point, it may be helpful to look at that and reviewing these maps and figuring out what the final designations are going to be, but
The language does guide or inform a potential development request, saying, like you said, why are we thinking this? Why are we thinking this is the land use in this location? What are we trying to achieve by having this land use plan? So I have found that the language of the plan is informative, it is helpful.
that's true. I guess what Nathan was getting at, and what he and I talked about is, it's not enforceable, right? If a developer or someone were to come in and say, well, this is what your general plan language says, right? It might help guide them to a particular use, but at the end of the day, there's still some flexibility about what those particular uses are. which you as a council control in the form of zoning.
So the map is it? Cause I was always under the impression that the language was an important part of the plan.
It is, I guess I'm
It's
not
not enforceable?
illustrating this, it is enforceable, what I'm saying is, it's not the final say, right? If this were to go to a court's gonna look at that and say, well, is what you put in here represented in the map?
Does it matter? Kinda, sorta, not really.
Right.
It depends.
It does depend, right? It does depend. And so,
But your main exhibit's probably that map.
and I guess the reason we brought it up is, we're not saying it's unimportant, but we're not saying maybe you need to spend an hour per page going through the language. Is that, I guess,
Yeah,
kind of what we were
so
getting at?
really,
I
we're
see.
trying to figure out how we move forward as staff. This is a plan that undoubtedly will adopt it, and the last one was done in 16, so we'll start looking at it maybe again tomorrow. But how do we move forward? Do we wanna schedule some meetings where you're just going through the narrative? Do you wanna spend more time focused on this, and then we could refer when we say, hey, we don't like that shade of green, we can go back and look in the language and say, okay, what are we trying to do? What I'm trying to do for Michael and his staff is trying to come up with a framework. How do you want to review this? It is a lot of reading. You've had it now for a couple months. I don't know how in-depth people have gotten into it. If you already have a lot of commentary in there, that would be great, but what we're trying to do is come up with a structure, a way to move this along.
Comment.
I don't know how. It's a big lift, right? I guess my comment would be, when we've had other big lifts, sitting down, having a single purpose, work meeting to just go over that item. I hate having more meetings and doing that, but it seemed to be a productive way to get through agreements, to get through multi-pages of stuff and just say, okay, anybody got a problem with section 1 or section 2 or section 3, and just kind of hash out some of those things, at least at a high level. We don't have to spend hours and hours on it, but that would be my recommendation for how we would probably have the best bang for our buck.
So in that meeting,
Which have to be after April 15th. I
So-
just got done telling my wife that. I can't commit to anything else until the busy season.
So if in that meeting, would it be more helpful for the council to sit down and just go through the narrative? Or would you wanna start on the map and work your way through the map, and when there's something that we think is a question, we can then refer back to wherever it's written up and have those conversations? I'm just trying to figure out how to make the best use of your time. Because I think just starting and going all the way through that, and then we come back and we're changing, it feels like we're gonna be spinning our wheels quite a bit. So I
Is
guess
that
you're
your
hearing my
suggestion?
suggestion is, I would start with this map,
Okay.
and
Nathan,
I
whatever
mean,
you
without a
say, and we all reserve the right to completely derail your plans at any
Okay.
time.
The plan will be, we'll set up a time, we're gonna start at the north and we'll just work, with a method all the way down, and if there's a color on there, you say, I don't know about that, then we'll move to the narrative. If you've already been through the narrative and you have some strong feelings about it, let us know, and we will try to, you can let us know now, we'll try to address those. But we'll work on scheduling a meeting, for April 16th.
So I agree with all that. I think we kinda, at least the three of us been through this, have the same frustration. We didn't know kinda where Teddy and Warren are, and Warren participated in this with the planning commission. What I think we've all kind of voiced in previous discussions is just our frustration that like all of this has been done, and now it comes to council for us to make a decision we haven't been involved in along the way. And for me, looking at it from the top down, I think you made the point several times, like these new zones and things that, like, a lot of them just don't make sense to me. So I think maybe that is the best way to go, is let's just start with the map and have that discussion from ourselves and say, right, here are the main things that we're concerned about that we want to have happen here, and then we can deal with the minutia after that.
I support that direction too. I'm not, opposed to that, and I think you're right. Yes.
I just think we'll be
Yeah.
forever
It
and not making
It seems
any
backwards that it's gone through planning commission so in depth for so long, and then the council who actually has to make the decision on it, we it comes to its very last. It's always weird to me that that's the process.
Well, to
But-
be fair, I mean, we've had a few
No,
joint meetings
for
with
sure.
it, but have voiced these concerns along the way,
Yeah.
right?
This is, I think you've made this point repeatedly. This is like one of the biggest decisions that we make as a legislative body. Like, this is one of the most important, impactful things that we make. And it is very complex, very detailed. It's taken, 3 years? 4 years to get vetted and re-vetted and redone and surveys and meetings and, that's a lot of background and a lot of information, and a lot of effort and a lot of work for us to come in and in a 20-minute meeting say, oh yeah, we're okay, and approve it, right? That just seems, to your point, a little bit silly. So I think
No
there is,
consultants, like, that's where I get derailed, is I don't have patience for that stuff.
yeah.
We can,
But us,
do it.
but us
Do the
getting
math.
together in a meeting is probably a really good start to get our concerns, questions, ideas starting to get verbalized and formalized so that we can start addressing those and taking action and fixing things as we're, going along. At least starts to make progress, right?
Cause I think if we focus on the major things, which to me, why are we doing this? My understanding is there's two main reasons. One, we have to, so every so often, how many years are we required to?
Well, they recommend every
I
five
don't know, the
years.
statute requires, at least I haven't seen it called out.
There's just a suggestion sort of
Yeah.
thing. So the main thing then is that previous versions of this council have made zoning changes that conflict with the general plan, and it has to be changed to conform to the decisions that were made. Like, that's what has to be done, right? When we want, and it's good to take the opportunity to do some planning around it, but I think maybe gone too far off in that direction rather than focusing on the main things.
One of the key parts with the general plan though is it guides our master plans, our impact fee studies. So we might be losing out on some impact fees and some monies that way, so.
That's a really
It's
important
really
thing to
good to keep it
understand too,
updated so that we can keep those updated.
I'm saying, that's what I mean, what are the main things? It's not the flowery language, it's not renaming all the zones, right? I mean, those are things that can come with it, but I think maybe we've been focusing on those rather than the meat.
Feels like sometimes we focus so much on like if it was a blank canvas, rather than looking at it like it
It's
is
not.
a
Yeah, we talked
city
about
that
that
was
earlier.
entitled, and we have very few areas that aren't entitled, so let's just get it done and move forward. And so, and I understand there's been COVID and things like that through it, but it's been super frustrating for me. Just speaking for myself, it's been very frustrating that the time is taken, because now I think about it, it's like a year from now, we should be looking at it again, cause it will have been 5 years, so it doesn't seem like that the process has gone very smoothly, and there's probably a gazillion reasons why, but I just think that we just need to simplify it, get it done, get it aligned with what's here, what we see as the vision, anything that's not entitled, get it done so that and then the other plans need to overlay it, and we look at it again in
Let's start by
2 years.
focusing on the main things that need to be done.
Yeah, I agree.
And then we can move down from there.
Okay.
Mayor, do you have any comments?
Two comments. One, Michael, I don't know, and Nathan, Chase, you guys might have to speak to this. One thing I loved about the planning commission, and one thing I struggle with still is, one thing is to look at a map. Another thing is to get out and look at the property and the layout, the topography. I would love, I don't know if we can do it with the whole quorum thing, and I don't know but I would love to do the same type of tour that we did with the planning commission. We go out and look, and we can talk, and we get a feel for these areas. I think that was so beneficial to me, see some of those areas, because some of these areas we're talking about that don't have development, it's hard to picture what that development could be in topography, So I would love to see that included. So let me know if we can do that. And then my second comment would be, yes, the map is the focus, but it's incumbent on us as a council now to read through that general plan. We have it now. We've got the copies. We can read through that and bring up our concerns. We don't have to go through that in a meeting. We can focus on the map, but I think we have to, as a council, take time on our own to go through that general plan, the language, and bring up issues after the map. So
We're just saying use that as a starting point, right? And work down from there.
absolutely. No, and I know what you're saying. I'm just saying we can do a lot of work on our own before we even get to that meeting. So we're, that's all I'm saying.
I think that plays in really well the conversation we had earlier too. So I had a discussion with Michael and staff around some of our issues around changing some of the zoning names and refixing some of that stuff. Anyway, as part of that conversation, there was this idea of, are there certain areas that we might wanna preserve for certain kind of things, like, you and I had talked about, certain areas that have long been held agriculturally and maybe something to sustain that on a future basis kind of thing, so maybe there's some overlay zones we might wanna talk about and where those might be, and I think doing what Lauren's talking about would help us picture where those areas might be and what we might wanna consider for that, so.
Okay, anybody else have comments on this?
So are we looking in April then? Is that what
Was
we're?
that serious when you?
Yeah, actually, the email I sent out responding to another request for something in the evening, seriously, like every evening is, I'm tapped out.
April 16th, is that what you said?
He said after.
Well, I mean, it's just like,
They're gonna
And
extend
a
that.
reasonable time sometime
Yeah.
after April 15th.
yeah, I mean, if you can put it out a month and a half or so, then I can plan around it, but I'm seriously booked through the end of March, easy.
So it sounds more like if you can kind of nail down a date with Jared and then the rest of us will see if we can
Sorry.
add into that, it's all good.
That's your problem.
You have a livelihood, it's okay. Okay, any other questions or direction? Okay, I will accept a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second.
Okay, we adjourn. See you at 7 in the general meeting.
Sure, you were in a tight meeting, look at that, boom,
Yeah.
way to go. Yeah, we should have you do more of these.